Welcome to AI BookCast. I'm James, and I'm excited you're joining us for a deep dive into something we all experience but rarely understand: humor.
And I'm July, here to help navigate this fascinating and complex subject.
We've all had those moments where a joke just lands perfectly and we can't help but burst out laughing.
Absolutely. But have you ever stopped to think about what exactly makes something funny? Why do we laugh?
Honestly,
Yeah.
not really. It's one of those things you just kind of take for granted.
Well, that's what we're here for today, to unpack the enigma of humor. We've got a stack of books on the subject, all analyzed by our trusty AI, and we're ready to share some surprising insights.
That sounds great. So where do we even begin with something as slippery as humor?
It's tricky, right? Because humor is so subjective and personal.
It really is. What makes me laugh might leave you stone-faced, and vice versa.
Exactly. And then there's the whole cultural aspect. What's considered funny in one culture might be completely baffling in another.
Oh, absolutely. I remember traveling abroad and having some of my jokes fall completely flat.
Well, that's why we're going to focus on English humor in this deep dive. It's known for its particular style, its wit, and, dare I say, its sometimes dark and sarcastic edge.
Yeah, English humor definitely has a reputation. I'm curious to see what our AI has dug up.
Well, one thing that jumped out is how much the English seem to take pride in their humor. It's almost a point of national identity.
I've definitely heard that before. But is it really true? Or just a stereotype?
George Mikes, in his book English Humor for Beginners, makes a compelling argument. He points out that the English inject humor into even the most serious of situations.
So it's like they can't resist slipping in a witty remark even at a funeral.
Exactly. He even mentions parliamentary debates, which you'd think would be quite serious affairs, are often peppered with humor.
Wow, that's fascinating. I guess it's all about finding the lightheartedness in any situation.
Right. And Mike suggests this is a key characteristic of English humor. It's this ability to find humor in the unexpected, the mundane, even the potentially awkward.
I can see that. It's like they're always ready with a clever quip or a self-deprecating remark to kind of diffuse tension.
Precisely. Now, one of the big questions when it comes to humor is what actually makes us laugh.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well, there are a bunch of theories out there, and they're not all mutually exclusive.
Okay, so walk me through some of these theories. What are the leading contenders?
One of the classic theories is the superiority theory, which goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle.
Superiority theory. What's that all about?
Essentially, it suggests that we laugh at the misfortunes or shortcomings of others because it makes us feel superior.
So it's like a kind of schadenfreude, finding amusement in someone else's pain.
Exactly. Think about slapstick comedy, where someone slips on a banana peel. We laugh because we see them as clumsy or foolish, and it reinforces our own sense of competence.
Okay, I can see that.
hmm
But surely there's more to humor than just feeling superior to others, right?
Of course. Another prominent theory is the incongruity theory.
Incongruity. Now, there's a word I haven't heard in a while.
Well, this theory proposes that we laugh when we encounter something unexpected, something that violates our expectations or creates a sense of surprise.
So it's like a mental jolt, a sudden shift in perspective that tickles our funny bone.
Exactly. Think about puns, for example. They rely on the unexpected collision of different meanings of a word, creating a humorous incongruity.
Okay, I get it. So a good pun plays with our understanding of language and catches us off guard.
Precisely. And the incongruity theory can explain a wide range of humor, from slapstick to satire to wordplay.
That's pretty impressive.
Uh,
But are there any other theories we should be aware of?
There's also the relief theory, championed by Sigmund Freud, which suggests that laughter is a way of releasing pent-up nervous energy or emotional tension.
So like a pressure valve, letting off steam through laughter.
Exactly. This theory helps explain why we might laugh in situations that are actually quite tense or uncomfortable. It's a way of coping with the stress.
That makes sense. So we've got superiority, incongruity, and relief. Are those the main theories?
Those are some of the big ones, but there are others as well, and they all offer different perspectives on what makes us laugh. But I think the interesting thing is that they all have some validity.
So it's not necessarily about finding one right answer, but rather appreciating the different ways in which humor works its magic.
Exactly. And as we delve deeper into the world of English humor, we'll see how these different theories play out in practice.
This is already so fascinating, July. I can't wait to learn more.
Me too. And just to give you a taste of what's to come, let me share a quote from Terry Eagleton's book, Humor.
Okay, hit me with it.
He writes, "Humor is a way of being serious without being serious."
Wow, that's deep. And it really captures the essence of what we've been talking about.
Doesn't it? It highlights the paradox of humor, its ability to address weighty issues while still maintaining a sense of playfulness.
It's like using laughter as a shield, allowing us to confront uncomfortable truths without being overwhelmed by them.
Precisely. And that's something we'll see time and again as we explore the world of English humor.
Well, I'm hooked. Let's dive into some specific examples and see how these theories come to life.
Sounds good to me. Let's start by examining the structure of jokes. Understanding the mechanics of humor can help us appreciate the artistry involved.
Okay, I'm game. Break it down for me. What makes a joke tick?
Think of it like this. You have the setup, the punchline, and sometimes an additional element called a tag. Think of it like this. You have the setup, the punchline, and sometimes an additional element called a tag.
Okay, I'm following so far.
The setup is like laying the groundwork. It introduces the characters, the situation, the premise of the joke.
So it's like setting the stage for the funny part.
Exactly. And then comes the punchline, the moment of truth. It's the unexpected twist, the clever wordplay, the surprising revelation that triggers the laughter.
Ah, the punchline. That's where the magic happens.
Precisely. And sometimes you might add a tag, which is an extra little joke or comment that extends the humor even further.
So the tag is like a bonus laugh.
You got it. Now, to really see this structure in action, let's look at an example from Christopher Kingler's How to Make People Laugh.
Ooh, I love a good example. Lay it on me.
Okay, here's a classic. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything.
Uh-huh. I love that one. It's so simple but so clever.
Right. And it perfectly illustrates the joke structure.
All right, walk me through it.
The setup is the question itself. Why don't scientists trust atoms? It establishes a scenario that piques our curiosity.
Okay, so we're intrigued. We want to know why scientists wouldn't trust atoms.
Exactly. And then comes the punchline. Because they make up everything. It's a play on words, utilizing both the literal and figurative meaning of makeup.
Ah, that's the incongruity theory in action. We're expecting a scientific explanation, but instead we get a humorous twist based on wordplay.
Precisely. And it's that unexpected shift in perspective that triggers the laughter.
So understanding this structure can actually help us appreciate jokes more.
Absolutely. It's like knowing the secret behind a magic trick. You can still enjoy the illusion, but you also have a deeper understanding of the skill and creativity involved.
I love that analogy. It's like we're becoming humor connoisseurs, appreciating the nuances of a well-crafted joke.
Exactly. Now, speaking of nuances, let's move on to another fascinating aspect of English humor.
Wordplay.
Wordplay. Ah, the land of puns, spoonerisms, and all those delightful linguistic tricks.
You got it. Barry J. Blake, in his book Playing with Words, argues that wordplay is more than just silly word games.
Oh, tell me more. He suggests that it actually reveals a lot about how our minds process language. It highlights our ability to recognize multiple meanings of a word or phrase simultaneously.
So it's like our brains are doing mental gymnastics, juggling different interpretations, and finding humor in those unexpected connections.
Exactly. And puns are a prime example of this.
All right, give me a good pun to illustrate this point.
Okay, here's one I came up with. Why don't they play poker in the jungle? Too many cheetahs.
Oh, that's terrible, but I love it.
Yeah, right. It's so cheesy, but it works because it plays on the similar sounds of cheetahs and cheaters.
So our brains are tricked into hearing one word, but understanding another, creating that humorous incongruity.
Precisely. And Blake argues that this ability to recognize multiple meanings is a sign of linguistic sophistication, not just silliness.
That's interesting. So puns are actually a sign of intelligence.
Well, let's not get carried away. But they do demonstrate our brain's flexibility and creativity when it comes to language.
Okay, I'll buy that. Now, what about those other forms of wordplay you mentioned? Spoonerisms and malapropisms.
Ah, those are classics. The spoonerism is when you accidentally swap the sounds of two words, often with hilarious results.
Oh, like saying, you have hissed all my mystery lectures instead of, you have missed all my history lectures.
Exactly. And a malapropism is when you use a word that sounds similar to the intended word but has a completely different meaning.
Like saying, dance a flamingo instead of dance a flamenco.
You got it. These slips of the tongue can create some truly side-splitting moments.
They certainly can. And they show how easily our brains can get tangled up in language, with humorous consequences.
Precisely. And this playful manipulation of language is a hallmark of English humor.
Now, before we move on, you mentioned that wordplay reveals a lot about how our minds process language. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Our brains are constantly trying to predict what's coming next in a sentence or conversation. When we encounter a pun or spoonerism, it disrupts our expectations and forces us to reevaluate what we've just heard.
So it's like a mental speed bump forcing us to slow down and pay attention.
Exactly. And this process of reevaluation, of resolving the incongruity, is what triggers the humor.
That's fascinating. It's like our brains are wired to find enjoyment in these unexpected linguistic twists and turns.
Precisely. Now, moving beyond wordplay, let's delve into another crucial aspect of humor. Context.
Context. Okay, I'm intrigued. How does context affect humor?
Well, a joke that's hilarious in one context might fall completely flat in another.
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely experienced that before.
Yeah. Right. And this is because humor often relies on shared knowledge, assumptions, and cultural references.
So it's like an inside joke, only funny to those who are in on the joke.
Exactly. And Blake provides a great example in Playing with Words.
Okay, what's the example?
He talks about a phrase that, taken out of context, sounds incredibly offensive. I've got a dozen bitches you want to go at it.
Whoa, that sounds pretty bad out of context.
Right. But in the proper context, it's revealed that the speaker is actually talking about his prize greyhound dogs.
Oh, wow. That's a complete turnaround.
Right. It highlights how crucial context is for understanding and appreciating humor.
So what you're saying is that a joke's success depends not only on its structure and content, but also on the relationship between the teller and the listener, their shared understanding of the world.
Precisely. It's this unspoken agreement on what's funny, what's acceptable, and what's off limits that shapes our experience of humor.
That's a really important point, July. It reminds us that humor is a delicate dance, a subtle interplay of language, culture, and social cues.
Exactly. And it's this complexity that makes humor such a fascinating and endlessly rewarding subject to explore. Well, it's this complexity that makes humor such a fascinating and endlessly rewarding subject to explore.
Well said, Jedi. Now, I know we've been focusing on the theoretical side of humor, but I'm curious to see how these concepts play out in different types of jokes.
That's a great idea. Let's take a look at some specific categories of jokes, from ethnic jokes to stereotype jokes to those so-called dumb jokes.
Sounds good to me. Let's get specific and see how these jokes work their magic.
Now, I know we've been having a lot of fun dissecting humor, but it's important to remember that not all jokes are created equal.
Oh, absolutely. Some jokes can be harmless and lighthearted, while others can be offensive or even hurtful.
Exactly. And it's crucial to be mindful of the potential impact of our humor, especially when it comes to sensitive topics.
So let's tread carefully as we delve into these different categories.
Agreed. Now, one category that often sparks debate is ethnic jokes.
Ah, yes. Those jokes that play on stereotypes associated with particular ethnic groups.
Right. And while some people might argue that they're just harmless fun, they can perpetuate harmful prejudices and reinforce negative stereotypes.
I can see that. Even if a joke isn't intended to be malicious, it can still contribute to a culture of prejudice.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that humor can be a powerful tool, and it's our responsibility to use it wisely.
So when it comes to ethnic jokes, it's best to err on the side of caution.
I think that's a safe bet. Now, another category that often walks a fine line is stereotype jokes.
Stereotype jokes, those are the ones that target specific groups based on generalizations, right?
You got it. Think about lawyer jokes, or dumb blonde jokes, or jokes about people from a certain region.
Yeah, those jokes can be tricky. Sometimes they can be funny if they're poking fun at a stereotype in a clever way.
Right. But they can also be deeply offensive if they reinforce negative stereotypes or perpetuate harmful biases.
This is all about the intent and the execution.
Exactly. A stereotype joke can be funny if it's done with a light touch and a self-aware wink.
But if it's mean-spirited or reinforces harmful biases, then it's best to avoid it.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to a category that's a bit more lighthearted. Those so-called dumb jokes.
Ah, yes. The jokes that make you groan, but somehow still manage to tickle your funny bone.
Exactly. These jokes often rely on absurdity, wordplay, or just plain silliness.
Like, why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything.
Haha, exactly. It's so dumb, but it still makes me chuckle.
Right. There's something about the sheer absurdity of these jokes that can be incredibly disarming.
Agreed. They offer a break from more sophisticated or intellectual humor and allow us to just enjoy a moment of pure silliness.
And sometimes those dumb jokes can be surprisingly clever.
Oh, absolutely. They can play with our expectations, subvert logic, and reveal unexpected connections.
Like that joke about Mrs. O'Toole, the Patagonian woman who gets a visit from a policeman with a severed head.
Oh, I love that one. Remind me how it goes.
The policeman asks if the head belongs to her husband, and she says, "Oh no, my husband's a much taller man."
Haha. It's so dark and absurd, but it works because it plays on our assumptions about how people would react in such a bizarre situation.
Right. It catches us off guard and makes us laugh at the unexpected twist.
And that's the beauty of humor, isn't it? It can come from the most unexpected places and surprise us with its wit and creativity.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to touch on something you mentioned earlier, the strategic use of humor.
Oh, yes. Humor can be an incredibly powerful tool in various settings, including the workplace.
I can see that. A well-placed joke can diffuse tension, build rapport, and even boost creativity.
Exactly. Jennifer Aker and Naomi Bagdonas, in their book Humor, Seriously, explore this idea in depth.
And they provide some great examples of companies using humor to create a more positive and productive work environment, right?
They do. One example that stands out is Deloitte's bullshit software.
Wait, bullshit software. What's that all about?
It's actually quite ingenious. They developed the software that flags jargon and overly formal language in their employees' writing.
So it's like a grammar police with a sense of humor.
Exactly. It encourages clearer and more human communication in a fun and engaging way.
That's so cool. It shows that even in a corporate setting, humor can be used to break down barriers and foster a more positive culture.
Absolutely. And another example I love is Google X's Dia X celebration.
Dia X, what's that?
It's basically a Day of the Dead for failed projects.
You're kidding. They celebrate their failures.
They do. They build altars to their dead prototypes. They deliver eulogies for the businesses they've shut down. They mourn the ideas that didn't quite make it.
That's incredible. It's like they're embracing failure as a natural part of the innovation process.
Exactly. And they're using humor to reframe failure as a learning experience, something to be celebrated rather than feared.
It's such a healthy and refreshing perspective. It shows that humor can be used to create a more resilient and adaptable culture.
Absolutely. Now, before we sign off, I wanted to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Okay, hit us with your wisdom, July.
Well, throughout this deep dive, we've explored the complexities of humor, its various theories, its structure, its cultural nuances.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And it's clear that humor is a multifaceted and often elusive phenomenon.
It's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle.
Exactly. But I think the beauty of humor lies in its very elusiveness.
So we shouldn't try to overanalyze it or pin it down.
I think it's more about appreciating its power, its ability to surprise us, delight us, and connect us in unexpected ways.
To make us laugh, to make us think, to make us see the world in a new light.
Exactly. So let's all keep exploring the world of humor, keep laughing, and keep sharing those moments of joy and connection, even if they're fleeting and hard to define.
Beautifully said, July. And on that note, I think it's time to bid our listeners farewell. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into humor. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way. And remember, life is too short to take everything seriously, so keep those funny bones tickled and never stop laughing.